Good morning. It is March 24th, 2025, and my name is Patrick Lovell, and I have a message for all of you out there on Blue Sky. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of the folks that are finding me and discovering me. And I'm recent to Blue Sky, and I stuck my toe in the water on in Blue Sky about a month ago. Maybe it's when I first started out. Maybe it was more like 2 months ago. I can't remember the exact time, but when there was kind of a mass exodus from X, and I was getting messages all over my X posts and feed, "Hey, go to Blue Sky, try it out," and everything else. And I did. And initially, I was just like X, inundated with sex bots, and I just was like, "Oh God, here's another social media site that's thwarting the information that I'm trying to get desperately to the people out there that I know that exist that need to hear it." But there's this huge, you know, impenetrable membrane that surrounds the people that I know are looking for the information I have, and me being able to penetrate this ecosphere to be able to get it to them. And that's part and parcel to this algorithm that I've been trying to discover and sort out, for quite frankly a number of years now. And lo and behold, someone told me how to uh, thwart and block and report sex bots. And once I started doing that, I think it freed something up on my feed, and I tapped into a few things here and there, and then all of a sudden I started to experience exponential growth on Blue Sky with real people, and it's pretty amazing. And I'm starting to kind of get the sort of sense that how it works and how the confluence goes and how you connect and so on and so forth. But some of the messages that I was sending that was radiating with folks that again, were following me and I'm following back, and we're building or being a part of a broader community and that sort of thing. And hopefully many of you will discover what I'm offering is something I hope you find very intriguing and very important to our collective efforts. But um, I had recorded a couple of videos that were anti-fascist in nature, and that was kind of the trajectory. And I started to find anti-fascists on Blue Sky, and I'm ecstatic. I've been looking for you for now years because I know you've existed, and I am maybe for the first time in a long time hopeful that there is an opportunity to connect with community and collaborate and build a movement that is requisite this insanity of corruption that we're in the midst of. And that's where I come in. So just a quick kind of overview of who I am and what I do and what I'm all about. Again, like I said at the outset, my name is Patrick Lovell. You can find me on YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel. It's Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. Um, I've made our work, which is really pretty much the blueprint for the information that I'm trying to convey to the millions of people that need to hear it, in a long form documentary series that was quashed by the Borg. What do I mean by the Borg? Well, the power behind the power that manipulates and puppeteers everything that's been going on. And is this some sort of conspiracy hyperbole? No, of course not. This is just the money and the power and how it works. And the information I have is the information that the proverbial matrix, hive matrix of big money, that is the big money machine, that's the billionaire apparatus and media and government and the revolving door and intelligence and really every military, industrial, and all of the corporatocracy and all of the layers of this sort of machine ultimately depends on what it is that I'm revealing and how they've over the long haul, many, many, many years in the process, decades in the process, have put us in a position that we're now, many people are discovering for the last month, this insanity of obviously the Elon Trump presidency. And to even consider that with the pictures and the things that we're seeing from Doge and the things that we're seeing from whatever your come from is. But obviously, it's a code 5, level 5 disaster. The warnings that people like me have been making for a very long time that we are on the verge of absolute fascism and tyranny has arrived, even though we've been in the midst of it for a very long time, of course. And by my story, the last 14 years, which reveals what many of you are asking, which is how is it possible that this billionaire apparatus, this criminal Trump, this guy who's broken the law immeasurably, has never A, been held accountable, B, how is it possible that he actually won the presidency, and see how are they able to completely rug pull the law and operate illegally with no consequences to the point where it's like everybody is like, what? And then going to the point of now fracturing and a smattering of protests around the country. And then, of course, this effort, and justifiably so, and I'm actually happy to see it and maybe to a degree inspired by it, but I want to address it briefly anyway. The Bernie anti-oligarchy tour with AOC. All of these things are kind of a manifestation, particularly that last piece. If you think about it, it's not, well, Tim Walz is out there, but it's certainly not um, Kamala Harris that is proclamating, the resistance by any stretch, and your guess is as good as mine at what that means in the grand in the grand story. But of course, the anti-oligarchy Tory by Bernie is a welcome, and as you can see, like almost I don't want to call it a dead show, but it's definitely striking a nerve with the right people that have been there the whole time that are pouring into the streets to conglomerate and gather with each other to hear Bernie say effectively the same thing he said for the last 14 years. But it's just now on overdrive because of all of the things that are happening with Doge, particularly as it relates to veterans benefits, as it relates to social security, as it relates to healthcare, as it relates to all of those things that, you know, really everything under the panoply of what Bernie has been saying for a long time and ran on, his candidacy for the presidency in 2016, of which, of course, I say that Trump plagiarized him, only for the white working class that wanted to take all of their anger and frustration with the neoliberalism of the Wall Street meritocracy Democratic sellout that happened over the course of the last 50 years and then galvanize that into the efforts that were underway for a very long time, beginning with the Koch brothers Heritage Foundation and all of their satellites and their huge apparatus of what would lead to this sort of libertarian development of Project 2025 that's lasted for a very long time, but in concurrent to what was Americans for Prosperity, that and then became the Tea Party, that then manifested into MAGA. But as all of that was happening with, let's just say, regular people, meeting them where they were, at a time that I've said in many of my truth bombs before, and if you know who I am, you've heard me say this, but Occupy Wall Street basically did a similar thing, but without the big money and it's stable. And then the police came down on Occupy Wall Street, but that fervency and that energy that came from OWS manifested into elevating Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders was on the right path 2014, 15-ish, where he was actually saying and calling out what needed to be said at the time, that Wall Street's business model was fraud. But he never could get past the front door, and that's a whole nother reason that things went cataswampus, not to mention being kneecapped by the DNC. But he pivoted to all things universal health care and, kind of a broader democratic socialist approach. But he took his eye off the ball, which was corruption. And now here we are in 2025, and the anti-oligarchy tour is all about corruption, but it's based on platitudes. And so who I am is the guy who's got the details of everything that has happened to manifest what we are. And if you discover my work at Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube, I've been doing these things for 3 years now, where I've been desperately trying to get this information to the people that need to hear it, but I've been blocked at every turn. And I'm not an expert in, nor do I have the resources necessary to overcome all of that took place after. What was the key consideration? I think it was the Net Neutrality Act that enabled Google and all of the online parameters within the algorithms to be able to pump up that which they were pumping up to begin with because of the way that they do their advertising and everything else. And I've got my thoughts on the process, but I'm no expert. So I've just been on the righteous grind trying to get this information to the people that need to hear it. But I'm finding an audience, and it's like shocking that A, you're real, and B, that there's so many people with such a fervency on BlueSky that are just really grasping for some sort of solution to turn the tables on the madness that we're all in the midst of. And I promise you, I am hopefully one of the key vectors that you'll start paying attention to, but delving into and sharing and asking me questions and joining me, because through my work, The Con, that you can find for free at www.thecon.tv, as a six-part investigation series into what created the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. Now, I've actually had some people recently on BlueSky say that's so long ago, it's not even relevant. What are you talking about? And yada yada yada. And I'm kind of like, Jesus Christ, people just have absolutely no idea what's going on. No, it's not irrelevant. It's the thing that nobody understands that never ended that's created now. Now, some people might be like, yeah, well, the Kennedy assassination happened, 63 years ago. And yet, a lot of people are still very interested in what actually took place in the event that maybe the CIA was involved, for example. And so that's certainly relevant. And maybe to a lot of people, the Epstein, sort of everything, particularly as it relates to Trump and all of the pictures that we've seen him with, Maxwell and Epstein. And of course, that's where he got his wife, Melania, and he was flying on the Lolita Express. So, yes, Epstein was a while ago, but it's still relevant as the day is long. And what I'm revealing to you is how the system works. And if you see The Con at www, and I know I don't have to say www, that's so 90s, but just for the older people that might be watching this, but it's at thecon.tv and it's free. And yeah, you do have to sign up your name and whatever because my distributor wanted to do it that way, and that's the way it is. But it's free, and I promise you, we're not using it to sell to any bad actors or crypto or bullshit like that. But we spent over $4.5 million to do what the $90 billion apparatus of the United States federal government, from the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, AGs around the country, special regulatory agencies that basically are part of that apparatus, and then of course all of media didn't do. They all failed us completely. And I'm just speaking straight to my friends on BlueSky because you guys know this stuff. And you're like, but what are we going to do? And yet you don't know the details. See, that's the thing, right? It's the details that matter because that's not what Bernie is interested in. And there's a reason for that. I'm not sure exactly what the reason is. And I could sidebar with many of you and I could talk to you at length about this. And I would love to invite people on my YouTube channel to discuss this, especially if they're Bernie experts or even Bernie himself or even AOC. If anybody, the only reason they'd want to engage with me is if suddenly I blow up and I'm getting millions of viewers that finally are speaking the information that I'm revealing to you and the world, that Rachel Maddow and MSNBC and CNN and of course Fox and all of media from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times didn't deliver because they were all dependent on the cover-up. Every single one of them were dependent on the cover-up. The 2008 Great Financial Crisis was the largest criminal conspiracy, financial conspiracy, in the history of the world. And no, The Big Short didn't come close to telling us exactly what happened. But kudos to Adam McKay and Brad Pitt and everybody involved. It was a spectacularly beautiful movie, and it's fun, and it's categorized as a comedy. But they did have the wherewithal, and it was based on the Michael Lewis book of the same name. And there's a reason Michael Lewis writes characters the way he does. And I'm very familiar with the whole strata over the course of now decades. And the thing about what McKay did, which was so beautiful and poignant, but really leads you to understand who I am if you've ever watched that film and you want to put resonance on The Big Short. The last 5 minutes, he basically constructs this sort of monumental question, vexation, where it's like, so we knew the whole thing was a crime, a massive fraud of monumental proportions, and we did all of these things that would lead to convictions and consequences for the bad people that did the crime, and we lived happily ever after. And then they said, no, that's not what we did. That last 5 minutes is what I've been doing for the last literally 14 years. Now, on Overdrive, the last 6 years as it relates to my work, The Con, but when you watch, or if you watch the series The Con, you need to understand first that it was intended to be season 1. I have a lot more information that was intended to be season 2, but we got quashed. I'm pretty sure we got quashed by BlackRock. I know many of you know who BlackRock is. Many of you might not. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. They're probably the most powerful company in the world. They handle over now $9 trillion of money under their guidance, and they're larger than most countries on earth because they're an extension of the United States. And there's a reason they're the extension of the United States. Now, some of you might know who their CEO is. I know we're talking about a lot of things, Elon and Doge and all of these other things. So maybe for some of you, you've put this in kind of the way back of your mirror. But the guy's name is Larry Fink. And by the way, he was a partner with a guy by the name of Steven Schwartzman, and it was BlackRock and Blackstone. I still don't fully understand all of these black euphemisms, right? But because there's more on down the line, because there's Blackwater, of course, those of you who understand Eric Prince's billionaire mercenary force, and that comes into play. But then, of course, there was another outfit out of Florida called Black. Jesus, it's oh my God. It'll come back to me in a minute. They're absolutely huge in this, and when it pops in my mind, as it frequently does, as I'm riffing through these stream of consciousness, is what the revelation is and how they fit. And I'll come up with their name in just a minute. But BlackRock was these two companies that were joined at the hip by these two huge CEOs, and one of their main strategies of business were mortgage-backed securities. Now, Larry Fink, his early claim to fame after getting fired from, I think it was where was he at First Boston, right? Because he made some bad bets and that sort of thing, but he came back with a vengeance. At one point, he was put in charge of what was called the Resolution Trust, which was there to clean up the savings and loan crisis. Okay. So he understood all things commercial real estate fraud back in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, as he went forward, he ended up creating Aladdin, which is this technology that predicts indicators that help, big time traders get out in front of it. And he made, billions and billions of dollars for it. And that's part of it. But he was also involved with mortgage-backed securities, which of course is what tanked the global economy in 2008. And when we dug out of it, which took years and years and years to do, there was a monumental circus in play that the likes the world's never seen and still doesn't understand. So we had about 98 emergency meetings that took place at the Federal Reserve. At that time period, there was this large media hysteria about what was going on in markets, and it had something to do with liquidity and what was Wall Street going to do and what was Congress going to do and what was the real story, but it had something to do with mortgage-backed securities. But people like Anderson Cooper, former CIA guy that he is, and of course born into the Vanderbilts and whatever that means, that guy really had no idea what was going on. Rachel Maddow was young at the time. Nobody was telling the truth about how things worked. And I knew that because I was going through it myself at the time, because I had gone from living my American Dream 101. I was a successful producer. I was living in my first house. I had pretty gargantuan bills at the time. I had a young family. And all of a sudden, I got rug pulled. And I was in the middle of this whole thing. I was a television producer giving away houses, literally, riding this wave unbeknownst to me. And it crashed on me literally on my last television show. It was a national syndicated show where I was giving houses away to deserving people around the country. And that was part of the gist of the whole thing. And it was, on all of the different networks, because it was in, I'm trying to think of the term of the distribution. We were like on NBC in New York and KCAL in LA, whatever. I mean, syndication. So all of a sudden one day, and I think it was 2007, the executive producer of my show and the money behind the show, which was this big developer out of Seattle who was flying around on Gulfstreams one day and they went bankrupt the next, almost came to blows on the set of one of the shows that I was producing. And I was like, what the hell is that? Next thing I know, I go from, a six-figure income to, basically being rug pulled, and as did millions of other people. And so I go through this tsunami, this avalanche of what took place in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, and it changed my life forever. I'm not going to go through my whole story, but it led me on this incredible journey. Basically a crusade. I ended up making my first movie through Occupy Wall Street. I went to 33 Occupy and Wall Street, Wall Street encampments around the United States. My colleague and I, Eric Vaughn, wound up in New York City and Washington, D.C., which I called Oz because this whole thing was the Yellow Brick Road. And we ended up in D.C. and New York the weekend that the NYPD and all of the police were cracking down on this around the country. And we were right in the thick of it. But what I learned at that time was that Occupy Wall Street didn't have the sustainability because it didn't have the money and it was grassroots and it had intellectual aspects of it that went in different directions. But it did ask the most prolific question: what is the 99% versus the 1%? And then it was all based on kind of the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. But unfortunately, the people that were the victims of the 2008 great financial crisis weren't at the Occupy Wall Street encampments, not for the most part. Maybe they were at the beginning, but not in the aftermath. But what does that have to do with now? Well, it was because of that time period that it completely fractured the world, fractured the United States. I mean, the carnage that followed was monumentally, at least for Americans, worse than the aftermath of 9/11. I mean, yeah, not 3,000 people getting pulverized in one fell swoop in one moment in the calamity right before our eyes. No, it lasted for years, involved millions of people, and led to the calamity and the carnage around the United States, where we see homelessness and there were divorces and suicides, and it was insane. But then there was kind of a rebuild, right? There was kind of like, okay, the economy started to rebound, but for whom? Well, it was really the top 10%. But it was really the top 0.001% because of what I'm telling you. We floated markets illegally through the back door of the Federal Reserve, where we provided in 2009 $33 trillion in emergency loans to the financial system and the global financial system at that. And boy, there's a whole lot of stuff that was happening within the confines of that rebuild. And many of you might remember the video that was really happening on YouTube for a while that really showed the disparity of wealth. That was insane. And I was right in the middle of it, but I didn't fully recognize or rationalize exactly how important this moment was. There was this video of all of these Wall Street insiders on Park Avenue drinking champagne after some sort of IPO flip that they were involved with as the Occupy Wall Street movement was happening below them. And they were just kind of laughing, as in, let them eat cake. But see, what happened was the government circled the wagons, and these emergency powers with all of the players that were, that were involved in Congress at that time, that include Schumer and Pelosi, and then McConnell and all the guys that were part of the Republican side. And supposedly, they put down the political warfare for a short period of time to do something right by the country. And what they decided to do was create what was known as TARP, the Troubled Assets Relief Program. And they basically secured $700 billion to supposedly repatriate the markets, create flow in the capital markets, and supposedly purchase toxic assets that nobody understood at the time. And there was a lot of other dialogue that people on Wall Street were like, wait a second, is this moral hazard? What does moral hazard mean? Okay, I'll touch stone upon that in just a minute. But the long and the short of it is, here you had these guys on Wall Street in their tuxedos, and they were drinking champagne over the people, protesting this great carnage that happened in their lives. And it was just such a moment about the 99%, quite frankly, and the 1%. And as we learn later, it's really the 0.001% and then everybody else. But these guys didn't get $700 billion in the financial markets. They got 33 trillion with a T. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion in that emergency largesse that nobody knows about. That's first. And then there was a thing called quantitative easing, where there was 16 trillion additional dollars between, let's call it 2012-ish to 2016. And then we ended up with this another amazing hemorrhage that kind of had similar elements, but nobody exactly knows what exactly happened. But Japanese SoftBank, who's very involved with crypto now apparently, and Donald Trump, which is an interesting corollary, but they had a monumental shift on repo loans, which was exactly what took place during the 2008 great financial crisis with Goldman Sachs because of the shorts, and that kind of undergirded the big short. But the long and the short of it is, we ended up the Federal Reserve, provided another $22 trillion in this emergency stimulus that took place during the Trump administration in 2019, and that's all pre-COVID. That all happened as a result of the misuse illegally of the little-known statute in the Federal Reserve, um, you know, basically plumbing, I think many of the economists might refer to it, of these economic stabilizers, that because we're a sovereign currency and because we have the world's reserve currency, we're in a position to do what none others can. And we floated global markets, including us, to the tune of $33 trillion plus 16 plus 22. That's $71 trillion, guys, by 2019. That's pre everything that took place with COVID. Now, during COVID, many of you have probably heard of a lot of PPP fraud. One of the interesting corollaries about that is that the fraud, a lot of these people that were in on the PPP loan stuff, it happened like that. It's like they were almost given a memo in advance by the Trump administration or Steve Mnuchin at that time period to say, look, here's going to be some opportunity for you guys to get a grab bag of cash. Because if you look back, I mean, I remember stuff as ridiculous as the Kardashians and Tom Brady. And yeah, oh yeah, P. Diddy were in on the PPP loan fraud. That we're still like, what? And I think it was like $265 billion in fraud along those lines that, was just free money to the rich at that time period. But then there was also another element of Steve Mnuchin. You guys might remember there were like all of these emergency acts that were taking place, but we floated, if you may recall, casinos and cruise lines and airlines. Yeah, that all happened as a result of the same methodology and the mechanics. And it was really interesting during the Steve Mnuchin time period at Treasury during Trump's first term, because what we were in the midst of at that time was after the great financial crisis, the Democrats came together and they basically made a Faustian bargain. They created what was known as the, oh my God, it'll come to me in a second. I still have two names that I've got to think of, and this is a big one. And I've got to hit this, and I'll come back to it in a minute, because sometimes when you free flow and you do the stream of consciousness, you're not really thinking about exactly what you're going to say, so you didn't take notes. But I know this stuff inside and out, so it always comes back to me. But we ended up creating just 12 to 1,700 pages of law to prevent everything that took place during the 2008 great financial crisis that would enable the banks to get floated based on emergency largesse from the full faith and credit of the United States for being involved with fraud, which means deceptive acts and practices, which means crime. And there's different levels of remedies, and the highest, most comprehensive version that has the biggest consequences, racketeering, RICO, racketeering, influence, corrupt organization. So we have, within the legal parameters of our country, all of the ways to deal with this insane fraud that has been going on forever. But of course, what we show you in the con, and what I've had to realize firsthand, that includes also the courts, that crime pays monumentally. And so the question you have to ask yourself, and this is the question that we pose in our work, The Con, if you take the cops off the beat, or if you corrupt the cops, the criminals take over. And that's just the nature of the world. It always has been. And so many of you are wondering, okay, well, wait a second. Again, how is it possible coming up to now, March 2025, after a month of Trump and Elon and Doge and all of the illegal behavior, because many of you realize that the Republicans won both houses of Congress, and Congress is really the stopgap to the presidency, but so is the judiciary. And the judiciary is a stopgap at the appellate level on the federal bench, these different district courts, but it's not the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is in the bag of MAGA, and that's all tied to this corruption that I'm talking about. And oh yeah, by the way, I knew it would come to me. What I was referring to a moment ago was Dodd-Frank, okay? So Dodd-Frank has this legislation, and if you're an attorney or a scholar, you can sift through this information, but it's very difficult, as it is to go through really what I had to go through on this amazing journey where we spent millions upon millions of dollars to bring all of these truths to market. But then we were quashed by this Borg that controls everything. And this is why. Because again, we gave $71 trillion by 2019 illegally through Federal Reserve Act 13.3. And it says right in the statutes exactly what exigent lending is not supposed to be used for, that it was used for. So I'll just ask you a really stupid question. Do you think anybody in Congress throughout the history of the United States would write into law that we're going to, as a society, the strongest country in the world, the strongest economy in the world, going to provide endless amounts of capital to criminals, that anybody would vote for that, especially if the public understood that, to destroy the public? Would anybody ever write that into law? Would that be a possibility? Well, of course not, because that's not how it works. That's not how legalese works. That's not how politicians work. That's not how professionals work. They know how to hide stuff, and they know how to do stuff in a way that's like, when you don't have the information, which is asymmetric information, asymmetry, you don't know what to do. So look around at everything that's going on. I mean, yeah, Bernie is giving an AOC is giving a sort of a pathway, if you will, as an opportunity to vote our way out of this. You think we're going to have free and fair elections again? I don't think so, personally. Maybe at the state level, but not, at a presidential level. I think we have crossed the Rubicon, as they say. And I was warning about that every day, all day on X, and I was going against the board. And at one time, I was rising, pretty extensively, because I put a lot of energy into X, because I knew that was where the conversation was happening. At least that was my perception. And, I gave up on Facebook because Facebook was ridiculous. Obviously Instagram's not a place to do it. I was on TikTok for a while. It got up to 11 million followers or something like that, but they were doing nothing. I mean, none of this stuff was like computing. It was like talking to lobotomized zombies in the face of this Frankenstein that's happening. And now suddenly here I am on BlueSky, and people get it. And they're like, the right mindset, and they're the right people, and they get it. But what I'm telling you is the information that you don't have in your bailiwick, in your quiver of arrows, so that you can pull out to be able to slay the dragon, because without it, they're pissing on your head telling you it's rain. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Obfuscation, lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. The tricks of the dirty, rotten scoundrels, okay? By the way, it's history and it's all psychology. Yeah, but the thing about what I am revealing to you is that it's the truth. This isn't hyperbole truth. This isn't religious truth. This isn't faith. This isn't ideology. These are the facts of how things work. And that's what our legal system is supposed to do. In a murder investigation, somebody killed somebody. You got to find the weapon. You got to find the evidence. You've got to, answer the questions of intent, opportunity, and timing, and all of those sorts of scenarios to be able to get the criminal investigation that leads to the indictment, that leads to the conviction. And whatever the judge decrees is going to be the degree of the conviction is the consequence. But that's not what happened to the CEOs on Wall Street that buried tens of millions of people, starting with minorities and then tying them to the white working class, that then all of these really savvy, diabolical, evil geniuses that work for the billionaires like the Koch brothers manipulate into culture wars. And then on top of that, we ourselves on the progressive side, the left side, those that believe in education and humanity and the law and beauty and sustainability and all of those things, we tend to kind of go into silos of Black Lives Matter or Me Too or whatever that scenario is, without everyone coming together who's a victim of what it is that I'm telling you. And so many of you always say that the system is rigged and corrupt. Yeah, it is. Many of you are like, yeah, the billionaires in control. Yeah, they are. But how? Why? Why isn't the system doing anything? Because it's corrupt. Oh, yeah, it's corruption. Okay, but how does the corruption work? And it goes on and on and on and on. And all of that work is in the con. But then you're like, okay, and this has been my experience all along. Okay, Patrick, but you've got these answers. Okay, great. You work with all the professionals in the system and the heroes of our system, and you've got all this evidence. It's mind-blowing. What are we going to do? Well, we answer that question too. We created the Clean New Deal, myself and my colleagues, and especially Roseanne Rabiola Mile. But primarily, it's to take all of this information, because after the con, I ended up doing a podcast that many of you might remember that have discovered me on X and, and so on and so forth, because we're all over the place, right? But I did this podcast called the the new Untouchables. And I delivered a lot of the information that I intended to deliver for season 2 of the con, but of course couldn't, because when I say I got quashed by BlackRock, now imagine last spring where we ended up with Alvin Bragg's case, which was a lot, it was a slam dunk case for Alvin Bragg in New York with the New York jurors that ended up convicting Donald Trump on 34 felony convictions for falsifying business records and all manner, shape, or form of lying. But what we discovered in that trial was, and this goes way back, right? But it was relevant in the trial. People are like, oh yeah, you're talking about yesteryear. No, it's all now. So what was revealed in that trial was this guy, and these names always make me laugh because they just sound like cartoon villains or just something out of Mad Magazine. But David Pecker, the guy who was the top dude at the National Enquirer, and I'm from the 80s and the 90s, I go way back. We used to see these National Enquirers on the stands at the checkout line at the grocery store with some of these headlines, and sometimes you'd be like, whoa, that kind of has some resonance. It's like a lot of people said the CIA used to plant stories in the National Enquirer that were so absurd, so it would kind of fuse out and not be picked up by legitimate media, right? Things of that nature. Anyway, one of the things that Pecker had revealed was that they quashed Stormy Daniels. And that was part of the reason why Trump got convicted, because that's a felony under New York, I guess, election standards, right? You can't lie to the public, and you can't intentionally quash information that might swing the election. I mean, that was part of the conviction, right? And so, boy, and remember how fun it was to hear that conviction? I just thought about that while I was thinking about this Pecker analogy. That's funny too. Was the nature of hearing guilty, 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 guilty 34 times, and yet he still won the election after stealing, trying to steal the election, the insurrection, and having the Supreme Court come out and win it, and then everything else that happened since. Trump stole this election, but it's not just Trump. It's the whole apparatus. It's this apparatus that we've been involved with for now decades, but they learned from everything that I'm revealing to you, because they were all involved with it, that the law can be perverted and manipulated to work for the corrupt. All you have to do is control the money. And so President Obama's administration, through Eric Holder, ended up doing this dance and making a Faustian bargain with Wall Street, where they ended up paying $250 billion in fines. And that sounded like a lot of money, but 99% of you don't know what they paid those fines for and what those settlements say. Well, they say exactly what I revealed to you in the con, and there's more. But it's the revelation of the largest criminal scheme in history that never ended. That is the largest racketeering scenario in history, that at that time took a $4.5 trillion housing market, turning it into an $800 trillion global calamity that destroyed the global economy, predicated on everything post-World War II and Bretton Woods and yada, yada, yada. And it all ended. But what we did was we gave all the guys that destroyed the world, and you know this, but you don't know this. That's what's so funny and so ridiculous at the same time. This is what Bernie's not saying. He talks in hyperbole. So I can tell you that it was Jamie Dimon, CEO of Goldman Sachs, of Chase. I was thinking of Brian Moynihan from Bank of America and Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, and so on and so forth. All of the heads of the mafia. Ironically, during this information, and I show this in my stuff on the website of the Clean New Deal, this guy Raj Cohen, who was general partner for a law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell, who created the CIA, and he was in the point position to manifest the move of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 because he was representing the consortium. That's what he called it, the consortium. The consortium of the too big to fail banks, yes. And they backdoored $29 trillion based on this calamity of this fraud recipe through liar's loans, through liar's derivatives, and all of the collateralized debt obligations and CDO squares and everything else with the insurance. I mean, my God, it was just ginormous, okay? And we never recovered, because the only people that recovered is we floated the ultimate billionaires and the billionaire apparatuses. So yeah, you're right. When you look at Elon and you look at, the tech bros and Larry Ellison, and you look at Peter Thiel, and you look at, really just the whole smorgasbord of this factory of billionaires. and they and they have complete control. And now we're talking about the unitary presidency was a merger of the CEO dictator, which is what corporate America has been doing since the 80s. And then ultimately you tie it to, Curtis Yarvin and all of this, what do they call it, the dark enlightenment. Yeah, the dark enlightenment. And what I continue to tell everybody is that what happens in the dark is not good. Well, it can be, but if you get roofied and raped and you get pile drived at a P. Diddy freak off, yeah, that's not good. And that's what we're talking about. That's what the uber rich, the billionaire class has done to the law and market forces. So a lot of people want to say this is capitalism. Yes, it's capitalism in so much that capital and liquidity is the lifeblood of everything. And it could be, and capital is like, to me, fire. It can be good or bad. We all need a modicum of exchange in exchange for our human value to be able to survive unless you're going to be independent. And being independent is not an easy thing to do. And what I mean by independent is you go off grid and you build your own, house and sustainability and clothes and food and whatever else, and you live happily ever after. I couldn't do it. Let's put it that way. Even though I like to think of myself as independent, that's truly independent, and that's not me. We have to work together to get things done in human society. That's how it works. That's how civilization functions, okay? And a civilization without the law or separation of powers and understanding of the mechanics of consequences for illegal activity that leads to corruption is the problem, okay? You all know this. But again, it's who did what, when, and how, what they got away with, and ultimately what's the who done it. Because, guys, I know that millions of us are just absolutely disgusted and beside ourselves that the most vulnerable in society are being basically ground down, like getting blood from a turnip, for these billionaires, like the richest guy in the world, Elon Musk, who is running Doge to what? Snuff out Social Security and actually turn it into a Ponzi scheme. And he is a Ponzi scheme in many ways. And I will say this about Elon Musk. I used to be a big fan of Elon Musk, of course, before I knew him. And I've been kind of like down on Musk for about, I don't know, 4 years, but it's the last 2 years. And particularly once he was involved with the head of the consortium that ended up buying, Twitter and turning it into X. And by, the consortium, I'm talking about private equity guys. I'm talking about hedge fund guys. I'm talking about sovereign bank or too big to fail banks. I'm talking about the sovereign Saudi wealth fund and, a handful of billionaires, including a couple of oligarchs from Russia, no less, right? I've seen Elon go from, and we're both big readers of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And there's this character in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy called Zaphod Beeblebrox, and he's got two heads. And I knew that Elon was a big fan ever since I saw that cool Tesla shot in the astronaut out in outer space, and I thought that was always really cool because I'm a real entrepreneurial guy and a progressive guy, and I believe in science and technology and the universe and science fiction and all those really cool things. And I'm also a big fan, quite frankly, of satire. I love Mel Brooks. I love, Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, Monty Python. I mean, those are the things that I grew up on, right? So I've got a real sense of humor, but obviously this isn't funny. But the long and the short of it is, yeah, it's the end of the road. It's like the great David Byrne said, this ain't no party, this ain't no disco, this ain't no fooling around. And also, as he said, as the great prophet said, same as it ever was, right? Because this is history repeating itself. And like the great Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. But this is the same formula. And in fact, I've been doing some really interesting truth bomb riffs with incredible scholars and some of the top people that I work with that came out of the DOJ and the FBI and the SEC. And everything that we've seen Elon in the midst of with Doge is I'm telling you, an exact lift of everything that took place in the 80s and the 90s, especially with corporate, hegemony, with these CEO tyrants that basically have taken over the world. Because there's this, when Elon Musk was out on the stump a couple of weeks ago with the chainsaw, he didn't just think of that. That came from a senator or a congressman that was involved with this guy Gilleran from the Clinton era, that they were going to do the same thing, which basically, gut regulation, which led to what we call deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization, which means lawlessness for the corrupt. And there's a whole lot of reasons they did that. And yeah, I have really all the answers. I've been at this game for a very long time. Okay. But again, people are like, okay, one, the billionaire class is just collapsing and collapsing and collapsing and turning this into a fascist state. Our wonderful United States, there wasn't even a shot fired. There wasn't a revolution. It wasn't Russia or some enemy coming over to basically invade us. It was ourselves. It's this it's a lot of things, but it's a disease, but it's the corruption of this Trump contagion, or what do we call it? It's not just Trump contagion. It's Trump. It's like a psychological construct. They kept talking about, and they being Bill Maher, the idiot that he is, and Elon Musk and a couple other. They come up with this ridiculous woke mind virus, right? It's the psychology to say, don't look here. Don't look at what we're doing. You're the problem. We're going to cut through all of this waste, fraud, and abuse, and we're going to give people what they want in democracy because we won the election. Yeah, 2 million votes, 3.5 million were stolen or suppressed. It wasn't a mandate, and the country's completely split. But at the same time, MAGA is a lot more organized and top down, right? And as it always has been on that side, than everybody that is really, quite frankly, intelligent, because you're going to skew where you go based on all of your reasons and so on and so forth. But my message to you is we can't do that anymore. We have to unite and become one. And corruption is the tumor that is destroying everything. And the information that I'm providing you is the opportunity to turn the tables, to purge the misery of tyranny, to create a renaissance of possibility. Why? Because there's better ways to spend $71 trillion than approximately 300,000 people in the financial space to basically skull fuck the world. And if you don't know that, I'm sorry, God, it's so easy once you fully understand how this whole thing operates, and you'll become like Neo in the Matrix, where it all happens in slow motion and you can see Smith for what he is. I mean, take the red pill that I'm offering you because it is the truth. And again, to all of you, and there's always a healthy degree of skepticism from people on the left because they're like, oh my God, this guy. Let me tell you a couple of things that happened this weekend, because I'm trying to get the message out there, and I do put some of our messages on other people's accounts, and some people regard that as spam. And I'm sure there's a better way to do it. So if you have insight into how to best stimulate the message and all of this insane information that I got to get out there to the people that are looking for it, I would love and welcome your insights and your knowledge and your expertise and that sort of thing on BlueSky. But one person notified me, and I got into a little bit of a brouhaha about it, that I was labeled a spam. And I'm like, spam? This is spam? And I showed, some of the colleagues that I work with that are like out of Yale and the best criminologists in the world in the Department of Justice and all of these things are the good guys. And that's spam. And then I found out that the person that reported me as spam apparently was involved with crypto. And I misunderstood that as maybe they were selling crypto. And I'm like, oh, well, there you go. The spammer is trying to get rid of people that are competing with them. But it turns out there were people trying to prevent crypto. All very complicated stuff. So they took off the report of me, and I appreciate that if you're listening out there. But I'm sure there's better ways to do it than try to get these messages on other people's feeds. And so I'm going to hashtag the resistance. I'm going to hashtag anti-fascism, and then I'm going to do my own hashtags, which are purge corruption, hashtag purge corruption, hashtag the Clean New Deal, hashtag redeem the dream, and hashtag truth is marching. Because the only way we're going to get our country back is if tens of millions of us unite with the truth of how the corruption works. Because you can't fight on your heels. You got to fight with dynamism, and you got to hit them where it hurts, and you got to hit them where the money counts, because that's what's going on. They're stealing. In fact, AOC said this, and I'm going to give her credit for this, on Friday, I think it was, in Denver, when they were on the anti-oligarchy tour. But she said they're stealing it from us. But she doesn't know how they're stealing it. And I will say this about AOC, and I've said this for those of you who have heard this. Look, AOC is a great dancer. She's got a great story. She's pretty smart, but she made a lot of promises she hasn't kept. And now she's kind of lightning in a bottle in a certain way, and she's not really the resistance, okay? Because she doesn't know this information. And I reached out to her with people that were in her camp, people incidentally that were in her camp that she fired to play ball with the with the Pelosi wing of the DNC. Okay, but 6 months ago, AOC is out there saying RICO is not a crime. RICO is the mother of all organized crime. It's the umbrella of all organized crime. And then her defenders were like, yeah, well, RICO isn't a crime because it requires the predicate acts that are the crimes to be put together to become RICO. Well, yeah, but RICO actually has statutes and consequences. So it's a crime. It's a giant crime. But again, these are things that people like AOC don't know. And now Bernie here, on the other hand, look, Bernie was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. He knows how to deal with budgets at a city and state level. He didn't fully understand the federal budget, or excuse me, how we budget, the federal budget until he got involved with Stephanie Kelton and MMT. Then he started to open it up, but he didn't really fully understand it completely. But then Stephanie Kelton and her ilk are disingenuous to a degree as well, because they were playing ball with the system as it was, that were telling Bernie and, quite frankly, Obama and everybody, throughout this whole time period of how we can fund government and how the Fed can do what it does. And Congress has the power of the purse through Articles 1 and Articles 2. And we all see how that has been backdoored because of the executive presidency, but it was backdoored by the Federal Reserve doing the illegal acts of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is how we've been funding or financing criminals for the past 14 years. We've given them tens of trillions of dollars to roofie and rape and P. Diddy freak off on everything that matters. And so what you see from the con through the Clean New Deal is problem solution. And again, I'd like to walk you through the precepts, but I've talked long enough. I'd really encourage you to read, look, understand. I did a tutorial where I did a 2-hour discussion about every aspect of the Clean New Deal on my website, on YouTube, Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. And I'd highly encourage you to watch it and spread it, because these are the details, people, that can take the whole thing down and turn the page. Because right now what's happening in the Democratic Party is they're like, first of all, Kamala Harris was like, let's etch a sketch the last 14 years, okay? Let's just pretend like none of this happened. I'm going to do all these things moving forward, and we're going to be great. And meanwhile, Tim Walsh, everybody's favorite, like, shucks guy that's a football coach and a real deal guy that's not a part of this matrix, he was the right pick. But ironically and cynically, he was picked by none other than Eric Holder, who was made in the charge for the DNC's VP pick. And he's the guy that created everything I'm talking about. That's how insane this corruption is. And so the question I wanted to pose to Tim on the campaign trail, which I encourage many of you to do now as you're exploring the Clean New Deal, is ask Tim what I know. Well, remember, Tim was a history teacher for, I think, 25 years. He was in the National Guard. He's a high school football coach, won state championships, great guy, but also very progressive at the same time, but a super good guy, right? He's not coming out of McKinsey. He's not coming out of a think tank. He's not coming out of a revolving door white shoe law firm. He's not a part of a hedge fund or private equity. He's a real guy, right? And so the question that I wanted to ask him, and I would encourage you all to ask him, is, hey, Tim, in your 25 years of teaching, did you ever teach your students that the American Revolution and the separation of powers and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the war on slavery and the war on fascism and all the progressive movements in between that led to the civil rights was all of that so that we would create a country of, by, and for the corruption by the billionaires that were getting tens of trillions of dollars free to put them above the law and market forces? How would he answer that question? How would he answer that question? I can tell you how Kamala would answer that question. She'd move on to the next thing and tell you, let's turn the page. And by the way, her ticket to the presidential ticket was because that's what she does. And by the way, same for Pam Bondi. They came out of the same era. Pam Bondi was whoring for Bank of America. Seriously, she's their point person. Is that a surprise based on everything you're seeing from her at the DOJ? So if I post this stuff on X, for example, it's not going to go far. But I really hope it goes far on BlueSky, because I was like experiencing exponential growth, and it reminded me of that moment, right? And this is what I've been trying to do forever. And please know that when you get to know me, I'm a producer. I come from a Hollywood background, so I use a lot of Hollywood metaphors to try to get the point across. But this weekend stuff, made me feel like I just got the hypodermic needle in my chest, like Uma Thurman coming up from a coma, a heroin comatose, where you dart up and it's like, whoa, I'm alive again, right? That's what it feels like, because all of the anti-fascists and all of the people who say fuck Trump and all of the rest of it, because yeah, I mean, Trump is like what? The king, they live king of the lobotomized MAGA zombie apocalypse, where only pimps, whores, junkies, and parasites thrive in the bloating dead well carcass of the American dream. And what I'm telling you is, when you live in light, you live in truth. When you lie, you're depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you lie inside, you die. Stop lying, stop buying lies. The universal truth, regardless of what you come from, okay? This is the universal truth. This is the singularity. What do I mean by that? Well, let there be light. From the Big Bang, we know that light was forced into the darkness of the universe because of the power of the supernova. That's the universal construct. That's physics. That's cosmology. That's science. We know that. That's the metaphor for you if you become a nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth that I'm revealing. And what is it going to do for you if your focus is the climate? Well, is there better ways to spend than drill, baby, drill, and absolute corruption from the financial oil, juggernaut? It's the matrix, military-industrial matrix. That's what that's been, and it has been since the end of the Cold War. Do we have the technology to move forward? Yeah. To rebuild the entire energy infrastructure grid to be about $7 trillion. Where are we going to come up with the money? Do you not understand what I've been telling you? We're a sovereign currency. The Fed just digitizes money into accounts, and it's called productive capacity. Some people might remember it from Keynesian economics. We don't have to worry about the money. That's not the problem. It's the money going to the guys that are roofing and raping us, and the face of it is Trump, Elon Trump. That's the Frankenstein, Elon Trump. And now nobody's safe. It's not just one group of people. Nobody's safe. You know that. Corruption births and fuels fascism. When absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it, a moral code to glorify it. We know this over 300 years of history from imperialism and maybe 1,000 years of history of human and mankind. That's why we had separation of powers. That's why we had the New Enlightenment and the Revolution, and that's why we have the Constitution, because the law has to be supreme. And when you have the truth in this, again, I'm not the savior. The truth is, I'm just the deliverer. So join me, take my hand, and join together, and let's create exodus from this bondage of slavery, from the pollution of corruption, and then, we'll be free again, to create the renaissance of possibility. And if you ignore this, we drown. United, divided we fall, united we achieve, we triumph. Anyway, I've talked a lot longer than I wanted to. My voice is going out. I'm leaving it all on the field. This is the righteous grind. So hashtag the righteous grind, hashtag purge corruption, hashtag the Clean New Deal, hashtag redeem the dream, hashtag truth is marching. I got all the answers in the Clean New Deal. My God, please, I'm begging you. I pray that you find this I pray you find this life-changing, because I'm starting to see that in my posts, and people are like, oh my God, where have you been? I've been out here the whole time, man. I've been out here doing this righteous grind, slugging in the trenches like I'm in a mosh pit from hell. Thank God I was raised by punk rock so I could figure out how to do this. And if you know the Dropkick Murphys, please get this message to them, because we're all in this together, man. I believe in liberty and justice for all. So when you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity, decency, sustainability, beauty, liberty, and justice for all, when we unite in the Clean New Deal, that is our destiny. And there's nothing we can't accomplish together. Onwards and upwards.